Welcome to the Catholic Table Talk podcast. This is where everything Catholic is on the table. New episodes Thursdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on most podcast platforms. Here's your host, William Sauber.
In this day of age, or this time of year, when the show comes out, this show is winter, right? Most of the country is experiencing extremely cold weather, shorter days, and with the season of Christmas being over, just kind of getting into the let formation. It's kind of like retreat season in a way for a lot of parishes. Now you have summer caps, of course, but at least for me, and I think a lot of people, it's a good season to kind of get out of the house and go on a retreat. But if let's say you're a catechist in your own parish and you want to lead a retreat, but you don't know how, um, how can you, or why should you, or so many questions, right? To lead a retreat. Well, today we're gonna talk about how to lead effective retreats. So again, if you want to do it in your own parish, if you want to, do it more of a diocese level, um, or maybe just start one on your own. What is the secret to developing effective retreats? And that is today's topic. Before we get more into that, though, I want to thank you again for just supporting the show through 137 episodes now. If you have a show topic, speaker request, or if you want to order merchandise or have a sponsorship on the show, please email us at catholictt@gmail.com. Again, it's catholictt@gmail.com. Mostly for show and speaker requests, but also sponsorship and merchandise as well. And hey, don't forget to share the show and like the show so we reach more people and get more great speakers on the show like we have today. The speaker who's going to help us go through developing effective retreats today has been on the show before. He was on episode 76, which was Following God's Call in Ministry. And he's a very nationally known speaker. He's a dramatic speaker and musician who shares his faith with honesty and passion, drawing from over 20 years of professional ministry. He is committed to bringing people to Christ through story, humor, and artist precipitation, which, I listened to him at Stewartville Conference in 2018, and that really summed him up. He had a lot of humor, but he was really engaging us to bring us closer to Christ, in which there was a huge thing, got our attention with laughter and brought us back to why we were there. And so he has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in pastoral studies. His name is Cooper Way, and we're so thankful again for having him on for the second time. So let's welcome back to the show, Cooper Way. And Cooper, thank you so much again for just your willingness to come back on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Billy. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. And like I said, you have a lot of humor, and but you don't leave what the topic of what we're talking about and why it's so important. So that's what I really admire about you on that. So, I mean, and again, I mentioned I saw you in Steelville 2018, Rochester, Minnesota, and that was more of a conference, but it's also like a retreat.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, a lot of people want to go, they send their kids on retreats, or maybe a lot of parishes, at least in my state of Minnesota, are more with the priesthood is more transforming into more ACCs, and they're kind of getting maybe retreats on their own. But that kind of leaves a problem with a lot of people of, they're asked to lead a retreat, which they have never done or probably never even thought of doing before.
Right.
So just in your experience as a speaker and being on these great retreats throughout the country all your life, what's the secret of developing effective retreats? Or I should say, is developing secret retreats easier than we might think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot that goes into developing retreats, and and it's, and you go from every aspect, everything along the lines from either doing, something super, super simple where you're, doing something at the parish, maybe like in the parish hall, or we're doing something pretty extravagant where you're, taking your young people in a bus and you're going to a retreat facility, which I tend to think is probably the better way to do things. I mean, certainly time and money and resources are all factors that go into developing retreats. So, I mean, to me, is it easier than you think? Yeah, it can be. It can be pretty easy. And but at the same time, it's like, let's call a spade, so sometimes in my experience, I've either been a part of a retreat where I've been asked to come in to speak, or asked to plan a retreat. And sometimes what happens is in a parish setting, they'll go, oh, we're going to have a 3-hour retreat, and it's going to be in our gym, or it's going to be in our parish hall. And typically it's surrounded, mainly the ones that I get called into or get called about often are confirmation retreats. But I think you got to call a retreat what it truly is. A retreat to me, is a removal of ourselves from the norm, from the everyday, and putting ourselves in a place to allow for us to hear the Lord, where the Lord is calling us to, where the Lord is beckoning us to, allow us to let go of the things of the world, let go of the kind of the normal day-to-day things that kind of catch our attention, that grab our attention, that distract us from things, and allow for us to get away from those things. Think about, what does a retreat mean? A retreat means to get away from, right?
Right.
And so what those, sometimes parishes will bring me in for actual retreat where they go off site. But then again, like I was saying, with these 3-hour retreats, they're in the parish hall. I mean, it's really not a retreat when we really think about it from that standpoint, the way I just described it, because you're not getting away. You're in the normal place that you normally have, like your normal, religious education class, your normal confirmation class. It's at the parish hall. It's in the normal place. It might just be longer, and it might just be that there's an extra speaker, a different speaker who is there, as opposed to the normal DRE, or the more normal, or the usual youth minister. But I would just call those days of reflection, probably more than I would call them a retreat. And because it's important that we don't give retreats a bad name. Again, I think a retreat is where you really just get away and go to a different place. And if that's within your scope of your resources and your time and your ability and your money, yeah, please get away. However, if it is something that's like, well, it's just not in our capacity to be able to do, then there are things that you can do to make that normal space feel a little bit more retreaty, to where it's different,
Right.
from the day to day. Yeah.
Okay. No, and I mean, this brings me back, like you mentioned, confirmation retreats. I mean, it brings me back to my confirmation retreat. We went to a town about an hour south of here, and it was an all-day retreat. So it felt like more like a retreat, like you said, not like 3 hours that you have at your parish, and it's almost kind of normal, besides it's longer. So yeah, that one felt like a retreat. But I mean, I'm sure for the home folks who are hosting us there at their parish, maybe not as much, because again, besides the bigger crowd, I guess, who was there, because there was like 4 or 5 different parishes. So yeah, I mean, I understand that's totally great. Get out, get away, and don't just go someplace for 3 hours and have a fun bus ride back. Go out and get away from everything. So totally agree with that one. So I mean, planning the retreat, I mean, should you plan different for different age groups? Because I mean, this time of year, I mean, I'm in my 20s now, but I'm still really connected to my phone. I mean, people, even kids are down to 5 years old, have a phone now, it seems like. And then maybe if you want to do more of a, older, people, for the adults of the parishes, for retreats for them, that's a little different too, of how we should plan to speak to them. So, I mean, I take it this is a yes, but should you plan differently for different age groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've
Right.
done, I've done the retreats for as young as second graders, which was
Wow.
more like herding cats,
Sure. Yeah.
to all the way up to, adults.
Okay.
And yeah, certainly there's difference in it. The younger that the person is, especially when you're in the middle school and high school level, there's just a certain degree of pace and what I would call like the cadence of the retreat needs to have, um, probably certainly going to still have the same components. You still want to have, um, connecting activities that grab the attention, icebreakers, energizers, those kinds of things. You want to have, other aspects of it, like a talk. You want to have a prayer experiences. You want to have music,
Sure.
games, things like that. So all those aspects, I think, can, whether you're a middle schooler, whether you're an adult, all those things go into a retreat. Now, the attention and the time that you spend on each of those aspects might change due to, depending on the depth of the person who's going through the retreat. So say middle schoolers, you might spend a lot of time on games and activities. And even if you do give a talk, maybe not as long of a talk, and then some aspects of maybe some small group sharing, a small group activities, to where, again, the idea with, say, a middle school group is that you really just want them to have almost like an introductory experience of what it means to go on a retreat. You
Sure.
want to be able to provide them opportunities to bond with one another, perhaps bond with the adult facilitator that is their small group leader, and opportunities for them just to connect in a good, positive way and learn some of those skills of what it means to be. Maybe they don't have experience of being in small groups, so there's a certain degree of skill that that you have to learn to participate effectively in a small group, whether it's good listening or open sharing, being a little bit vulnerable. There's those things, and you can learn those things in a very safe way at, when you're a junior, or sorry, when you're a junior high or middle school. Um,
Right.
and and their ability to sit and listen to a talk, for example, if is that time span is kind of minimized. So you might give like a 20-minute talk and then break out into small groups for about 20 minutes and then do a break and then repeat that process over. And throw in a game every once in a while, or an activity to kind of get them up and moving. And then of course you've got to consider even their normal cadence and their normal pace in their day to day. So you got to think about, okay, when they get up in their to go to school, for example, like if it's during the school year, they have a pretty regular pace, right? They might
Right.
start school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they might take lunch at 11, and then they might do, they might have a recess, right afterwards, and then school day is pretty much ending maybe around 3 o'clock. So you think about the time span that they're used to, like having their full attention, somewhere between, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours. And then now on a retreat, sometimes, especially if you do like overnight retreats, now you're asking them to push that attention span further along. And so you got to take all those things into consideration because they're not used to that. So, I always try to remember, like, if I'm going to be planning a retreat, but for young people, I always ask like the simple question, like, when do these kids normally eat lunch? Especially if I'm doing like a school retreat, like a eighth grade
Sure.
retreat or seventh grade retreat. It's like, when do they eat lunch? Oh, they normally eat at 11:15. Oh, okay, cool. So I don't want to do lunch in my schedule at 12
Right.
because they're starving at 11:15, right? So I want
That's
to make
how.
sure I consider that going into the day. Now,
Right.
fast forward, and you move up into the age group, those things you consider less and less. You can kind of have more of a general schedule. You get into high school, their attention span is greater. They're able to sit, they're able to go into deeper conversations. Maybe their small group experience and their small group time is lengthened. They still want to have fun, they still want to have some good times, but they also are the ability and they're capable, their ability to sit and to process, and their ability to sit and to share at a deeper level is there. Not that middle schoolers can't do that. Sometimes we don't give middle schoolers enough credit that they can go to a depth, but certainly as they get into high school, that ability is there. And then once you get into adulthood, certainly now we're starting to dive into considerations of, do we work in silence into this retreat? Do we work in times where an adult can go off and, someone can go off and be, by themselves for an hour contemplating what was just talked about in this talk? You get a good speaker and they really break open some great topics, and then be able to say, all right, we're going to take another hour and just kind of process what you've just heard. Like, adults can handle that, and adults probably want that.
Sure.
You wouldn't in your right mind go, all right, middle schooler, here's your talk, and then, all right, go off for an hour and think about the talk. Like, that would never happen. So
No.
yeah, sure. So there's different components in different ways, in different age appropriate ways to schedule and to create a retreat that is pertinent to the particular maturity, temperament, age, all that. So yeah, it's there's a lot to plan out, and certainly age is a huge, age and maturity are certainly huge factors that go into determining the style of retreat that you're going to give.
Sure. I mean, I was thinking about that pretty much too, about the school schedule. I mean, again, working at school, you have the big schedule up on the whiteboard as you walk past, and like, this time I'm doing this time I'm doing that. And it is a lot for elementary or middle school. It is a lot of breakouts and lots of doing different things to really keep their attention throughout the day, so they can come back maybe to class or do other stuff, different projects in the afternoon, and still have those cases of attention. And I must say, just from personal experiences, from student conferences or retreats in my diocese of St. Cloud here, is really, I really love speakers, but probably the best thing I like after I listen to a speaker is to go into small groups. I mean, again, that's just the age level I'm at, but because you hear these other different friends who what they took from the speaker and what their ideas are, and maybe they give answers in a way that you want to think of giving them. So I mean, that's a huge thing. Like I said, and plus you got, and like you said, silence. And as you get older, and some people still like to have free time, have a little downtime a little bit too. But yeah, it's definitely, you gotta really take into effect of what age you're dealing with, and again, it really, like you said, if you do overnight, I mean, you gotta keep those kids' attention and make sure they get a good night's sleep if they're in middle school. Otherwise, you might just stay up all night and have a sleepover or something instead of really being at the retreat. So
Yeah, that's the real battle, isn't it? Especially
Right.
when you're trying to get them to go down at night. It's like they don't have any of the energy in the afternoon, and all of a sudden you're trying to get them to do lights out at 10 o'clock at night, and they're just wired. Yeah, so
Right.
certainly that's that's another dynamic when considering whether or not you're going to do an overnight retreat or not. It can be certainly a great challenge for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that I want to follow up on
Sure.
this discussion is that you can't overstate the impact that, okay, so you could have the best speaker, the best musicians, and they might be able to break through, but there might, the one thing that's really great about sharing in the small groups, or at least allowing, perhaps even in addition to this, allowing for young people to share not only in the small groups, but also perhaps even sharing it in front of the group. If you've got a couple of young people, even high schoolers, that could share at a middle school retreat, sharing their witness of faith. I mean, that cannot be overstated about how much of an impact that can have on a person's life. Again, you could have the best speakers in the world, and they could say all this very wonderful, funny, high intensity, faith talk, and be inspired in so many different ways. But And then you could get a high schooler get up in front of a group of middle schoolers, or a high schooler get up in front of their peers and talk about their journey of faith. And that talk right there could have more impact and could be the difference maker on a retreat than the person you paid to come in, or the person you paid to play music or to speak. Sometimes that hearing the faith of one of your peers, or hearing the faith of somebody who's just a little bit above your age, that can be huge in the life of a young person, because it's kind of like they expect it from people like us, or they expect it from the youth ministers. It's like, oh, of course you're holy, of course you've got your life in place, of course you want to talk about Jesus. But when you hear it from your peers, man, that's different. It's like, whoa, like I didn't realize that guy had these struggles in his life, and that's how he was able to cope with it, was because of him turning to Jesus in this moment of desperation, just example, and being able to use that as a witness for their peers. That's another huge thing that I would say is a major component that could be brought into a retreat.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree, because I mean, no offense to you or any other speakers, but I mean, like, if you say, this is what I struggle with in my life, and you might relate to that, but we don't really know you as well as my friend who's sitting here, maybe has gone through the same experience, where we have a little bit more of connection. So you feel, you're like, wow, you're going through that, and you're like, I went through that in high school. So you have a
Right.
point of, this is how I got through it. So that's what you can lean on. But maybe your friend next to you is going through the same thing too. And you didn't know about that. So it's a little more, yeah. I would say personal. Again, no offense to that. But I mean, that's a great point. And I mean, it is too. I mean, like you said, you can have a best speaker and musician out there. And I do all the time on the podcast group. I mean, like talking to people, great speakers every week almost. And, it's like, wow, on the show, like, wow, I'm talking to you, Cooper. Like, I can't believe it. It's like, nope, you got to stay calm and listen to what they're saying, right? So it's, yeah, so you got to really keep their attention, and, yeah, absolutely. Great points. And that kind of brings us to the next question, is like, how do you gain and keep people's attention? Because again, it's not like, I know that guy, he's famous, or I know that guy, he's like he's my friend, he's the biggest star on the football team. But how do you like gain and keep people's attention during retreat? Which again, I know we talked about different age groups, right?
Sure.
But just kind of like average, I guess. I don't really want to say average, I guess, but if it's a group of young adult, let's just say recently conformed group of people, I mean, how do you keep and how do you keep their attention when you're speaking to them?
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind. I think, what I do whenever I go, I have my litmus test of things that I can do at the very beginning of a retreat to kind of figure out what is, what's the attention span, and what's the engagement,
Sure.
the key to engagement with them. I usually try to do the same things that I do everywhere, at least from the beginning. So I'm a musician, and I was a camp counselor. So part of being a good camp counselor is that you got to kind of know some of these goofy songs that
Oh, yeah.
that you bring in, the kind of interactive hand motion songs, which some people have just basically blacklisted from any experience. But I'm
Yeah.
still a pretty big believer in them, because I believe that they can tell, as a facilitator, they can tell me a lot about what the group I'm speaking to, what my group I'm facilitating the retreat for, where they're willing to go. So yeah, I'll do a fun interactive song, and if the group goes there and they're like, oh yeah, we're totally in, and we're going to put our hands up in the air, we're going to go back and forth and move and do some crazy things, and it's like, all right, cool, that tells me what I can do from an engagement standpoint. It means I can continue to do music. It tells me that I can do this crazy game that I have on my schedule tentatively, because they were doing this crazy song at the beginning. Now some groups, I'll go and the music it just falls flat, and I just go through it. I just punch through that difficulty. I punch through that that uncomfortableness of singing up there. Come on, guys, you can do this, and and they're just all looking at me. It's like, okay, this is not a singing group, so now we're going to move on to maybe we're going to break them into small groups and do another activity where they're interacting with their small group that's fun and energetic and exciting. So so that's from the key, that's the icebreaker type stuff. So using music to do that. I use large group games to engage them, small group games so they get in their small groups, they interact with one another. And that is all like in the first hour. Like even if I've got like a 4 or 5 hour day, I'll probably spend the first hour just doing those things, because there's who knows, maybe they've never been in this particular small group, and so they don't really know these young people, their peers that are in this group. So it's kind of like you gotta build a community there. Once that happens, then like if I go off to start telling, like typically I break down my retreats, session 1 is going to be on this particular topic, session 2 on this particular topic. So there's always like a talk of sorts that I give, and the biggest thing, I get caught up sometimes like, oh, I want to tell them all this information. I want to break open this scripture verse, and I want to break open this passage into the catechism, and there's all these neat things, and I get excited, but it's like, wait, let's just keep it simple. You get really heady and start throwing in a bunch of, theology at them. But my biggest thing is telling stories. If you've got a good story, a fun, captivating story, or even, it doesn't have to be funny or anything. It can just be a captivating story. That then from there peels off to, let me tell you how this scripture verse connects with this, or let me tell you how this teaching of Jesus connects with this, or let me tell you how catechism spills into this. But the majority of it is storytelling, because people love to be told stories, and as long as you've got a good one, and you can find that connection between your story and some lesson of faith, I find that's a big piece of attention. And not reading, that's another thing. I think some speakers, even if they've got a story, even if it's a young person, they're nervous, they want to read their story. And it's so much better if you've got that story coming from your heart and you're talking to them without having to read every single word verbatim. Now, obviously, you're gonna have notes, and you should have notes. I think that's a safe thing to have. But as far as like keeping their attention, you think about the difference between when you're at mass and the priest gives this homily, and he's speaking to us, or versus he's reading it. It could be the same content, same words, everything, but it's like there's a tone that happens when you're speaking from the heart, or you're speaking to people versus reading to them. So to me, that's another big way to keep attention, and then not to go on very long. I was speaking at the camp that I grew up at as a counselor. I was speaking. I remember one of my co-counselors came to me afterwards, and I had spoken a little bit long, and she came up to me and she says, something, Cooper? She's like, brevity is the soul of wit. And I'm like, what? She's like, you talk too long. No. And so she goes, shorten what you say. You can bring it down in more manageable chunks. And so if you can say more in less time, then do it. But yeah, sometimes you get kind of caught up in your talking that you kind of forget, maybe I'm rambling. So yeah. So with that said, I'm going to stop talking.
No, I 100% agree. Like you have a pastor who reads from Papa on a piece of paper. It's not really, you're still listening to it, but it's not like really sinking like a pastor who gets down with the people, with the congregation, and has his hands going, and he's like looking straightly into your eyes every so often. And especially when it's about the priesthood or something, you're like, oh shoot, you got my attention. But yeah, totally. And like you said, tell stories, because a lot of people, like during the holiday season, they they have the echoes of arts, tell stories from the past, or tell stories about the past year, what happened to them, and they don't really, it's not really like you're throwing all this stuff at you and it's bouncing off your head. Again, like you said, theology. I watch theology stuff on YouTube, or more of theology Catholic radio, and my blinders just kind of go up right away. It's like I'm not really listening. It's something about just everything thrown at me. You do,
Right.
yeah, you do need to have a little storytelling and, like I said, speak it through the heart because, I mean, again, that's same thing, presentations. If you're reading everything that's on the slide, a lot of people are not going to be listening to you. But if you really, you're looking at them and talking and presenting to them, that's when they really find you like, do I say attractive and just like, the mind's attentive, I should say, not attractive, attentive. And yeah, so absolutely. And so basically don't really have too many pop-up questions. But before we wrap up the show, just kind of, I mean, like I said, I've been to a lot of retreats, dioceses, parishes, confirmations, Stewartville conference, like I said, only one time, hopefully going to seek the next year or two, maybe go back to Stewartville as a chaperone. But kind of, what are your top conferences, retreats that, I mean, I know this is about developing effective retreats, but if you're just wanting to send kids to a retreat, what is your top few that you kind of recommend?
Okay, great. Yeah. Um, yeah. Probably one of the best retreats, like straight up retreats that I've ever been on was, I've done this a couple of times, was um, a 4-day men's silent retreat.
Okay.
And so basically from Thursday night until Sunday morning, we completely enter into silence, and you kind of go through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And you hear a talk for about 30 minutes, and then you go off for, like I said earlier, you kind of go off for a couple of hours and just really reflect and dive deep and journal, just spend so much time. So to me, that's something that I think everybody should go on. So everybody should take time to go on a personal retreat. My wife's been trying to push me to go on one this spring, and I'm trying to figure out when I can do that. But she's like, "You need to go on a silent retreat and go get out." So, yeah, so certainly something that just allows for you to breathe a little bit, allows for you to kind of just spend some time with and to get away to be in silence. And you might be thinking, oh, I could never be silent for 3 or 4 days. Well, I mean, it's really not that big of a deal. I mean, some people go on 30-day silent retreats. So what's 3 or 4 days? And yeah, the first day is typically the hardest because you're trying to quiet your mind and trying to push everything out. And of course, the devil hates that we would go on a retreat for ourselves, which is why we always say, well, I just don't have time for a retreat personally. Um, so the devil will try to throw, if we say, oh, I need a retreat. Well, yeah, now he's going to go, no, I don't want you to get closer to Jesus. I don't want you to get closer to his church and to deepen your faith and become a stronger person who's, no, I'm going to start throwing distractions at you. I'm going to start telling you, throwing doubt, sowing seeds of doubt into your mind for why you shouldn't and cannot go on this retreat. So we kind of got to pray through that if we're considering that. So yeah, certainly a silent personal retreat. I think when it comes to conferences, I mean, you've said it a couple of times, Steubenville conferences, that I've spoken at and been a part of. I mean, there's potential for some very powerful experiences for young people and adults on those retreats, on those conferences. I mean, just it's kind of hard not to have a great experience because they bring in 3 or 4 national speakers who are top of the line, and I'm humbled to have actually been considered and been a part of those. Sometimes I've been to those events and I've shared the stage with some really big hitters, and I'm like, man, I don't deserve to be on the stage with those guys. I mean, these guys, I just feel like they were, like I was just so humbled to learn from them and to watch them up close and get to know them, and to recognize, hey, these guys are just like regular people. They're so cool. So certainly Steubenville conferences are huge, and certainly if any of your listeners ever get the chance to go, I would certainly encourage and to take a group. And there's some intensity to it as well, so you kind of got to be prepared for that. I think another one that I would recommend is Catholic Heart Work Camp, or any kind of work camp. It could be Alive in You is another great work camp that is in the country. And I'm trying to think of the other ones. If anybody's watching this, they're like, you got to mention my work camp. I can't remember. And dioceses have work camps as well. But I find that work camps are great because, they kind of get young people the opportunity to delve in their faith, but then also um, live out their faith, so you've had these, great, morning sessions and evening sessions where they're fortifying themselves and becoming, um, you know, growing closer to Jesus, but then they get to go out and be, as St. Teresa of Avila says, the hands and feet of Jesus in the world, and so they go out and they do service at these, these people's homes who are incapable of doing it themselves or for whatever reason. And so certainly work camps have been huge. I've seen major conversions happening at work camps, and it's a great place to take young people who might be new to the retreat experience, or might not necessarily be like in a place of, they might be just trying out their faith for the first time or really diving into it for the first time. Certainly a work camp, I think, has that ability to kind of break up the kind of the putting that work faith into action piece, but then also give them some taste of faith formation in the evening. So yeah, I would say, to me, those are probably the big three that I find, especially for young people, that have had a really great impact on at least that I've seen on young people, and adults too.
No, and it might be with someone else, it might be like, well, I'm more of a silent person. I like silence, so I can really relate to when silent. So it might be like, I'm very noisy, so but I want to try the silence thing, and maybe like again, like I know those work retreats. I don't really think of work retreats, but I mean, I've heard great things about work retreats, so it's a good way to get your mind active and doing it that too. So I totally agree with you on those three. Well, okay, I'm gonna throw this question in for you, Cooper. We have not really. Sorry, I didn't bring up your kids before we went on air, but I mean, how okay, kind of two-part question here, if I can get the words right here. So before you go on retreats and you speak, do you practice in front of your kids? A, and B, do your kids like going on retreats, and what type of retreats do they like?
Okay, so you asked if I practice what I'm going to do on retreats. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah, and do my kids like to go on retreats?
Yep.
Yeah, so the only thing, so I'm very much I'll come up with a plan, and a lot of times, like, I probably should practice whatever it is. But a lot of these things, I mean, I've been doing for so long that it's like, oh, I'm going to throw in this game or this activity or this talk. But even when I throw in a new talk or a new activity, sometimes I just go after it. I think through it a bunch of times. I watch. It's like, especially if I'm bringing a game on, from something I've seen online, I will watch it a number of times and then work it out in my head. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is the process. I don't always get the opportunities, and I don't have the means necessarily to always be able to practice like an activity or practice a talk beforehand. But just trying to familiarize myself with the major points, especially if I'm if I'm doing a new talk or a new game. I'll just make sure I have it written out very detailed in my notes. Yeah, as far as my kids, yeah, I've got, my oldest is 12, so we haven't really sent him off on a retreat yet. The church that we go to has what's called it's basically Vacation Bible School, but for middle school. And so, so he's gone off to that and has loved it. It's like a 3-hour period of time for a whole week each day during the summer. And yeah, he's loved it. And it's because it's full of activity. There's tons of activity, tons of games. You're on a team with your small group, so there's competition between the groups. But then, one of the things that he told me, he was out. I remember him saying specifically how much he really enjoyed the witness talks, because they would have high schoolers give talks about, their personal faith journey. And he really, really loved that. So And then also the praise and worship, just doing, singing music and really feeling like, that there's this, this great connection between song and, your spirit. And so, yeah, so I would say that my oldest ones probably had that
Sure.
more in-depth experience. And, but yeah, I loved it.
No, and that's kind of what, you touched on earlier was, a lot of younger kids might find it attentive, or, really have the mindset attentive to having their peers at high school or older kids talk to them. So that's a great example of that right there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's there you go, folks. Now you see that work. So that's a great example. So
That's right.
Cooper, exactly. So Cooper, just wrapping up the show here. If people want to book you for an event, order some, albums or music from you, how can they where can they get that at?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got a website. It's cooperray.com. Very simple. So COOPERRAY.com. And yeah, you can certainly contact me and book me through that. And then, yeah, music. I have a couple of songs on Spotify, I think.
Okay.
I say that, Oregon Catholic Press has been very good to me over the years. And so we've got some, I think maybe one of my albums has been put on Spotify. So, and they made that happen. So OCP. So yeah, if you're familiar with them, support them as well. They do some really great things, and they've been a huge advocate for me over the years. And I feel like they've given more to me than I've been able to give back to them. But yeah, but that would be it. Those two ways, certainly. And just in case, some people go on my website and they look at the little form, to contact Cooper, and they're like, I don't know who this goes to. Does this go to somebody who manages Cooper? Does it go to some weird thing that, no, I have no manager. It's me. So they can just go to my website, fill in that little form, say, hey, we're looking for a retreat, or looking for Cooper, somebody to come in to give a talk or to do music. And that goes straight to me to my email.
Gotcha.
So it comes directly to me.
Oh, that's what I like. Just go straight to the person, and yeah, it's a lot less of. I mean, it's not a lot of confusion if you have a manager or anything, but
Yeah.
it's definitely better when you speak to the person directly. So no,
Sure.
it's great stuff.
Oh, yeah, always going to come straight to me. That's for sure. And I prefer it that way.
Sure.
Some people want that manager to work with them, work with the person who's trying to book. But I very much want that personal connection. I want to know what's going on. I want to know what the host event wants and needs. I want them to always be in direct contact with me.
No, absolutely. Cooper Whale one, speaker, musician. Cooper, again, thank you for your time today and your willingness to come back on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a lot. It's been back and forth getting you back on. We're finding a good day to get you on, but we made it. And just thank you for your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Billy. Thanks for having me, brother. It was so good to be here again.
No, anytime, man. And again, if you ever want to come back on, don't feel like you have to wait for me. Just reach out to me, and we'll get you back on.
All right, that sounds great.
All right, Cooperway one, again, his website is cooperway.com. We'll have it down in the show notes for you, so it's easy access to that as well. And again, if you have a retreat questions, or if you're a book Cooper, again, email him and it goes straight to him. Don't have to worry about boy and all that stuff. So it goes straight to him. And that will do it for this week, folks. Again, share the show with family and friends so they can be better retreat leaders. Or again, if you're new to retreats, or you're new to retreat leadership, I should say, you go back and rewatch and always jot down more notes. So we'll see you next week, everyone. God willing, stay graced, go to sacraments, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Table Talk.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Catholic Table Talk podcast, where everything Catholic is on the table. Don't forget to subscribe to Catholic Table Talk on your favorite podcast platform to get new episodes delivered directly to you every Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern.